The distress signal. The dark silence of space stretched endlessly. Stars twinkled in the distance, but in the midst of this peaceful galaxy, something had changed. A signal, faint, but the room fell silent as everyone waited for the decision to be made. The youngest general stepped forward, a sense of duty in his eyes. We have no choice. We must answer their call. If there's even a chance that we can help, we can't turn our backs on them. The other generals exchanged looks, but none spoke out against it. After a long moment, they all agreed. The decision was made. Humanity would respond to the Xthorians' cry for help. And so, the message was sent back to the galaxy. A simple reply. We are coming. It was the first step into a new chapter for humanity, a chapter that would change everything. But little did they know, this decision would not only alter the course of a war, it would spark a conflict unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen before. Humanity's wrath was about to be unleashed, and the galaxy would never be the same again. As the message echoed across the vastness of space, the Xthorians, unaware of what they had just unleashed, waited anxiously. They had called for help, but what they would soon discover was that the help they had called upon would bring something far darker than they had ever imagined. And it was coming fast. The response from Earth was swift, and the ripple it caused was felt across the galaxy. As soon as humanity's message of, "We are coming," reached the Xthorian fleet, it sparked an unexpected reaction. The Xthorian commanders, already on the edge of panic, had no idea what to expect. They had sent out the call for help without any hope of success, yet here they were getting a reply from the most unexpected place. On Earth, the decision to assist had been made, but the reality of the situation was far more complex than any of the generals or scientists could have anticipated. What did it mean for humanity to step into the middle of this galactic conflict? What did it mean to aid a species that had once seen them as weak, insignificant? The war between the Xthorians and their enemies was unlike anything humanity had ever been involved in. The Xthorian Empire stretched across hundreds of planets, their fleet vast and powerful. But it had been decimated, piece by piece, by a coalition of enemies who had united to take them down. The Xthorian might, once so feared, was now faltering. But even as Earth prepared to send help, there was a question that lingered in the minds of the humans. Could they really make a difference? The fleet that was being assembled was nothing like the mighty warships of the Xthorian armada. Humanity's ships were still new, their designs far less advanced than the alien technology that the Xthorians wielded. But they were driven by something that the Xthorians hadn't expected. The fury and determination of a species that had been pushed to the brink of extinction in their own way. The warships on Earth's side were smaller, more agile, and packed with human ingenuity. The Deathworlders, the toughest humans from Earth's harshest environments, had been selected to crew these ships. They were hardened by years of surviving on the most dangerous planets in the galaxy. These were the people who had survived the wild, unpredictable dangers of Earth's toughest terrains. Now they were about to face an alien threat that no one on Earth had ever imagined. As the fleet prepared to depart, the atmosphere was tense. The Xthorian distress signal had been answered, but now they faced the daunting reality of war. The human fleet would have to navigate through dangerous space, encountering both alien forces and unknown dangers. No one knew what the future held, but what they did know was that Earth had no intention of backing down. The command center on Earth was a hive of activity as crews scrambled to prepare for the mission. Officers barked orders as ships were loaded with weapons and supplies, while technicians ran diagnostics on every system. The ships would leave Earth's atmosphere soon, and there was no turning back. The leaders of the fleet knew that this could very well be a one-way mission. "We don't have the luxury of failure," General Lyle said, his voice steady but filled with intensity. "We either win this, or the galaxy will fall. The Xthorian Empire is already on the brink of collapse. We can't let them regroup, or this war will only get worse." Beside him, Captain Hayes looked over the flight plans, her brow furrowed. And what if we can't make it in time? What if we're not strong enough? Lyle met her gaze. Then we fight anyway. We show the galaxy what humanity can do. And we make sure no one forgets that we answered the call. The ships were ready. The Deathworlders, the elite of humanity's military, were on board. They were ready for what lay ahead. The ex-Thorian fleet, though powerful and feared, had no idea what was coming for them. They didn't know that the humans they had once dismissed as insignificant were now coming to their aid, not with the intention of just helping, but with the fury of a species that had survived countless challenges. With a final check of their systems, the fleet of human warships launched into the cold expanse of space. They left Earth behind, carrying with them the hopes and fears of humanity. They were entering unknown territory, a galaxy at war, with no guarantees of success. As the human fleet traveled through space, the vast emptiness around them seemed to hold its breath. The signal had been received, but it would take time to reach the ex-Thorian-controlled sector. In the meantime, the fleet was vulnerable. But humanity wasn't afraid. They had always faced the unknown with courage, and this time would be no different. Meanwhile, far across the galaxy, the ex-Thorian leaders gathered, nervously watching the human fleet approach. They had no idea what to expect. The fear they had felt when they first sent the signal was now replaced with a deep unease. They had called for help, but they didn't understand the nature of the help that was coming. The Deathworlders, humanity's fiercest warriors, were unlike any opponents the ex-Thorians had ever faced. The humans didn't just fight to win. They fought to survive, to protect their own. And that made them terrifying. The ex-Thorian fleet, once thought invincible, was now facing a force that would stop at nothing to make sure they paid for the destruction they had caused. As the two fleets closed in on each other, the stage was set for an epic confrontation. No one knew how this would end, but one thing was certain. Humanity was about to show the galaxy that it had more power than anyone had ever realized, and the ex-Thorian Empire would never be the same again. As the human fleet continued its journey toward the ex-Thorian-controlled sector, tension mounted within the command center. Each moment brought them closer to an unknown conflict, and the weight of the mission rested heavily on every soldier, every captain, and every strategist aboard the ships. The fleet was a patchwork of different crews, from the highly trained Deathworlders to experienced officers who had fought in smaller skirmishes. Each person had their own reason for being here, but they all shared the same goal: survival and victory. The Deathworlders, some of the toughest humans from Earth's most dangerous environments, stood out among the crew. Their expressions were cold, their posture unwavering, but beneath the hardened exterior was a burning drive that made them one of the most lethal forces in the galaxy. They had grown up on Earth's most hostile lands, places where every day was a fight for survival. In their eyes, war was just another challenge to overcome, and they didn't flinch in the face of it. Captain Hayes, leading the mission, walked through the crowded halls of the flagship. Her boots echoed against the metal floors as she approached the bridge. Despite her calm demeanor, her mind raced with countless calculations. The distance they needed to cover was vast, and even the most advanced human warships would be vulnerable during the long journey. She glanced at the strategic map, noting that the closer they got to the ex-Thorian system, the more unpredictable the situation would become. "We can't afford any mistakes," Captain Hayes muttered to herself. "The ex-Thorian fleet will be watching, waiting for us." General Lyle, the commanding officer, joined her at the bridge. He knew the gravity of the mission better than anyone. His steely gaze never wavered, and yet the lines on his face told of years of war and endless decisions. "We've trained for this," he said. "We have the will, and we have the numbers. The ex-Thorian Empire won't be able to handle the Deathworlders in full force." "Still," Hayes replied, "we don't know what they've prepared. They might have reinforcements waiting. We must be ready for anything." She watched as the stars outside the ship became streaks of light. the vast emptiness of space slowly being replaced by the distant glow of their destination. The ex-Ithorian fleet, meanwhile, had already begun its preparations for the inevitable. Unknown to the humans, the ex-Thorian leaders had made several miscalculations that would soon come to light. Their own sense of superiority, built over centuries of conquest, had blinded them to the idea that an unexpected force might challenge them. Now, with the human fleet heading toward them, the cracks in their empire were starting to show. The ex-Ithorian military leaders gathered in their war room, watching their monitors with a mix of dread and disbelief. The humans had responded far quicker than they had anticipated, and the urgency of the situation became more real with each passing moment. The ex-Thorian commanders, who once thought their fleet unbeatable, were now facing the unknown, a human force that had shown time and again that it would never back down. How long before the humans arrive? General Zoreth, one of the highest-ranking commanders, barked. His voice, usually calm, now carried a note of worry. Approximately 3 days, replied one of his officers, but we can't be certain of their course. We've picked up disturbances in the outer sector, but nothing conclusive. Prepare the fleet, Zoreth ordered, his voice sharp. We will not underestimate them. We'll have the element of surprise. But even as the ex-Ithorian commanders prepared for war, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The humans were known for their unpredictability, and that uncertainty filled them with a growing unease. They had thought they were prepared for anything. But this was different. This wasn't just another enemy they could wipe out. It was humanity, a species with an unyielding will and a reputation for surviving against the odds. Back aboard the human ships, the countdown to the final confrontation ticked closer, and the crews began to feel the intensity of the situation. The Deathworlders were readying their weapons, checking their gear, and mentally preparing for what was to come. There was no fear in their eyes, only focus. They had fought battles in the harshest conditions, and they knew how to endure. But this battle would be unlike any they had ever faced. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting to show the galaxy that humanity's strength was unmatched. Captain Hayes stood on the bridge, her hands gripping the railing. I want every man and woman ready, she ordered. When we engage, we'll do it with everything we have. No hesitations. We'll show them exactly why they shouldn't have called for help. As the fleet neared the ex-Thorian sector, the tension aboard the human ships was palpable. Every person knew that this mission could change the galaxy forever. If they succeeded, humanity would prove that they weren't weak, that they could hold their own against even the most powerful empires. But failure was not an option. The future of Earth and its allies hung in the balance. The ex-Thorian fleet was about to face something it had never expected, humanity's fury, unleashed. And as both sides prepared for the coming battle, there was no telling who would emerge victorious. The stage was set for a confrontation that would echo through history, and the fate of many worlds would be decided by the strength and will of those who dared to fight. The tension in the command centers of both fleets continued to rise as the two forces drew closer. On one side, the humans were steadfast, their determination unshakable. On the other, the ex-Thorian leaders could feel the weight of their past decisions, and they knew that they had underestimated the human resolve. General Lyle stood in the briefing room, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the table as he stared at the flickering holographic maps. The human fleet had now entered the outskirts of the ex-Thorian-controlled space, and every ship in the fleet was preparing for the moment they would cross the threshold into the heart of enemy territory. It was not just a battle for territory. It was a battle for survival, and possibly for the future of the galaxy. We've intercepted their transmissions, one of the officers reported. They're scrambling their ships. The ex-Thorian fleet is on high alert, but they haven't moved into full combat formation yet. Captain Hayes, ever calm, nodded. They think they still have time. They think we're too far out to strike quickly. But they don't know us. We're going to make them regret that. The officers around her were silent, each lost in their own thoughts. The Deathworlders among them were sharpening their weapons and mentally going through the battle plans. They were ready for whatever came next. They had fought on worlds where survival meant killing or being killed, where every day was a test of endurance. To them, war was no different. It was just another challenge to conquer. Meanwhile, aboard the Thorian flagship, there was growing unease. General Zoreth had been pacing back and forth for hours, his mind working furiously to devise a strategy that would give them the upper hand. He had fought in many campaigns, faced countless enemies, but this human force was different. Their speed, their unpredictability, and the sheer power of their fleet had caught him off guard. He had thought they were just another primitive species in the galaxy, easily wiped out. But now he wasn't so sure. "Do we have any visual on the human fleet yet?" Zoreth demanded, his voice sharp. "No, General," an officer replied. "They've entered a sector with heavy interference. It's difficult to get a clear read on their position." "Prepare to engage them anyway," Zoreth ordered. "We cannot wait any longer. Set course for the human fleet's projected position. If they want a fight, they'll get one." As the Thorian fleet slowly repositioned itself, the humans were already ahead of them. The human fleet had mastered the art of misdirection, using their knowledge of the sector's space anomalies to hide their movements. They were not taking the direct route to the Thorian flagship. They were going to hit them where they least expected it. Captain Hayes looked at her officers, her gaze steely and determined. "We'll strike hard and fast. Hit them where they're weakest. We don't give them the chance to regroup." Her voice was firm, and every officer on the bridge knew what that meant. The time for hesitation was over. The Thorian fleet had no idea what was coming. The Dithworlders aboard the flagship were already preparing for the worst. They were not concerned with tactics. They were concerned with the battle itself. They had fought battles on the edge of space, on planets where survival was a daily struggle. To them, the coming conflict was simply another war, and they were determined to prove that humanity could hold its own against anyone in the galaxy. The Thorian fleet, still unaware of the full scope of the human threat, began to make its move. But the humans had anticipated this. As the Thorian ships approached, the human fleet sprang into action, launching a series of surprise maneuvers that confused the Thorian commanders. The humans had taken full advantage of the sector's natural anomalies, interference in the space-time continuum, and had used it to hide their true location. The Thorian fleet was now at a disadvantage. General Zoreth watched in shock as the human ships appeared out of nowhere, breaking through the cloud of space dust and debris, their weapons primed. "Impossible," he muttered under his breath. "How did they know where to strike?" Captain Hayes, standing on the bridge, observed the unfolding scene with a grim smile. "It's too late now," she said coldly. "Now we show them the power of humanity." The first wave of the human fleet's attack hit the Thorian ships with terrifying precision. The Thorian vessels, not yet fully prepared, took heavy damage in the first strike. It was a brutal opening to the battle, one that sent shockwaves through the Thorian fleet. Captain Hayes knew that this initial success was only the beginning. The battle was far from over, and the human fleet had just proven that it wasn't to be underestimated. The Thorian commanders quickly ordered their fleet into full battle formation, but it was already too late. The humans had seized the initiative, and now the Thorian fleet was playing catch-up. As the human ships closed in, their weapons firing with deadly accuracy, the Thorian ships scrambled to regroup. But the Dithworlders were relentless. They had trained for this moment their entire lives. Every member of the human fleet, from the officers to the soldiers, knew what was at stake. They weren't just fighting for their own survival. They were fighting to show the galaxy what humanity was capable of. The sound of weapons fire filled the air, and the space around the two fleets lit up with the brilliance of lasers and explosions. The Thorian ships began to fall back, but the humans pursued them, closing the distance between them with each passing second. The Dithworlders' ships were relentless, moving in for the kill, and the Thorian fleet began to realize that they were facing an enemy like no other. As the first hour of battle passed, the humans had gained a significant advantage. The Xthorian fleet was in disarray, their ships retreating under the pressure of the relentless human onslaught. The human fleet had not only matched them blow for blow, but they had also proven that humanity's fury was a force to be reckoned with. Captain Hayes stood on the bridge, watching as the Xthorian fleet tried to regroup. "They thought they could wipe us out," she said quietly. "Now they'll learn what it means to face humanity's wrath." And so, the battle raged on, with humanity unleashing its fury upon the Xthorian fleet, showing the galaxy that no one should ever underestimate them again. The battle had taken a turn, and the momentum was now firmly in humanity's favor. The Xthorian fleet, which had once been confident in its superiority, now found itself reeling from the unexpected onslaught. Every maneuver they attempted to regroup was met with calculated precision from the humans. Captain Hayes watched with cold determination as her fleet closed in, their ships moving like shadows in the dark void of space. "Give them no time to recover," Hayes ordered, her voice sharp and commanding. "Hit them again, harder this time." The Dithworlders aboard the flagship were ready. They had tasted the thrill of combat, and nothing, not even the formidable Xthorian fleet, would stand in their way. Their ships moved with precision and brutal efficiency, cutting through space with deadly intent. Every shot fired was calculated, each missile a promise of destruction. The Xthorian ships, despite their advanced technology, could not keep up with the relentless assault from the humans. On the Xthorian flagship, General Zoreth paced back and forth, his mind racing. The situation was slipping from his control faster than he could process. The humans had caught them off guard, and now they were paying the price. He had never expected this kind of resistance. He had thought the Xthorian fleet was unstoppable, but now it was crumbling under the sheer force of humanity's wrath. "All ships, fall back. Regroup at Point Delta." Zoreth barked, but his orders came too late. The humans were already closing in, their weapons charging for another devastating attack. The humans were not just fighting. They were sending a message, one that would echo throughout the galaxy. As the Xthorian fleet faltered, the human ships pressed forward, showing no signs of slowing down. The Xthorian ships, their once imposing forms now battered and broken, attempted to flee, but they were no match for the relentless human pursuit. In the midst of the chaos, a Xthorian ship attempted to break through the human lines, launching a desperate attack in an effort to escape. The ship's engines flared to life as it shot forward, but before it could get very far, a volley of missiles streaked through space and impacted the ship, tearing it apart in a brilliant explosion. The shockwave rippled through the surrounding space, and the Xthorian fleet was thrown into even further disarray. "That's the third ship we've taken down," one of the officers on Captain Hayes' ship reported, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "They're falling apart. We're not stopping until every last one of them is gone," Captain Hayes said, her eyes steely with determination. "This is for all the planets they've crushed, for every life they've taken. Humanity's wrath is unstoppable." As the battle raged on, the human fleet's tactics became increasingly brutal. The Dithworlders, trained for survival in the most hostile of environments, knew how to push their ships and weapons to their limits. Every move they made was designed to break the enemy's will, to strike fear into the heart of the Xthorian fleet. The Xthorian leaders, once so confident in their ability to dominate the galaxy, now found themselves on the defensive. Their ships, though technologically advanced, were no match for the ferocity and sheer willpower of the human fleet. The galaxy was beginning to learn a harsh truth. Humanity had a fury unlike anything it had ever seen. On the bridge of the human flagship, General Lyle looked out at the chaos unfolding before them. The sight of the Xthorian ships retreating, their shields flickering and their weapons firing in desperation, brought a grim satisfaction. But he knew this battle was only a small part of the bigger picture. The Xthorian fleet might have been broken, But the galaxy had yet to see the full scope of humanity's wrath. "We've broken their will to fight," Lyle said, his voice calm but filled with a sense of finality. "Now we finish this." The command was given, and the final assault began. The human fleet concentrated its firepower on the remaining Exithorian ships, which were now scattered and unable to defend themselves effectively. The human fleet moved in, their weapons tearing through the enemy's defenses with unrelenting precision. The Exithorian ships exploded one by one, their once imposing forms reduced to wreckage as the human ships continued their ruthless assault. The Exithorian commanders tried to make a stand, but the humans were relentless, cutting through their lines with an unmatched intensity. The final moments of the battle were a blur of explosions and blinding light. When the dust finally settled, the Exithorian fleet had been decimated. The once mighty force that had thought itself invincible was now shattered, and the survivors, if there were any, were scattered and broken. Captain Hayes stood at the command console, her eyes scanning the debris-filled space ahead. The victory had been hard-fought, but it was complete. Humanity's wrath had been unleashed, and the galaxy would never forget the lesson it had just learned. "This is only the beginning," Captain Hayes said, her voice cold and unwavering. "We've shown them our strength. We've shown them that humanity is not to be trifled with." The silence that followed was filled with a sense of finality as the human fleet began to regroup and prepare for what would come next. The galaxy would soon know that humanity, once underestimated and ignored, had proven itself a force to be reckoned with. And the Exithorian Empire, along with anyone else who dared to challenge humanity, would soon learn just how deadly that wrath could be. The battle was over, but the echoes of the carnage still lingered in the cold expanse of space. The Exithorian fleet, once a symbol of power and domination, was nothing but a shattered remnant of its former self. Humanity had sent a message, one that would be felt across the galaxy for generations to come. As the human fleet slowly began to regroup and prepare to leave the battlefield, a strange silence fell over the ships. The crew members aboard the various vessels stood in awe, their faces a mixture of disbelief and satisfaction. They had just witnessed the full force of humanity's wrath unleashed on an enemy that had underestimated them. The once untouchable Exithorian fleet had been torn apart in a matter of hours. But the war was far from over. Captain Hayes stood on the bridge of the flagship, her hands clasped behind her back as she stared out into the vastness of space. Her mind was racing. This victory, as sweet as it was only the beginning. The Exithorian fleet had fallen, but there were other threats in the galaxy, other forces that had yet to experience the full power of humanity. This was just the first step, she muttered to herself. We've sent a message, but the real work begins now. General Lyle stepped up beside her, his face grim. You know they won't take this defeat lying down, he said. The Exithorian Empire won't forgive this. They'll be back, and they'll come with everything they have. Captain Hayes nodded, her expression unwavering. Let them come. We're ready. As the human fleet prepared to move out, Captain Hayes knew that they had to remain vigilant. This victory had been hard-earned, but it was just a taste of what was to come. The galaxy would now watch as humanity rose from the ashes of its past, a force stronger than any enemy could have ever imagined. Meanwhile, on the remnants of the Exithorian flagship, General Zorath stood before his shattered command console, his face twisted in fury. The images of the destroyed ships, the burning wreckage of his fleet, filled the screens in front of him. His empire had suffered a defeat the likes of which it had never known. We underestimated them, he snarled to his remaining officers. We thought the humans were nothing but weak animals, barely capable of defending themselves. But they've proven us wrong. And now we will make them pay for this humiliation. One of his officers, trembling in fear, spoke up. General, we've lost contact with our allies. We're alone now. The humans have proven they can destroy us at will. Zorath slammed his fist onto the console, his rage bubbling over. Then we'll rebuild. We'll make the humans regret this day. But deep inside, Zorath knew the truth. The ex-Thorian Empire had suffered a blow that it might never recover from. The humans had shown them a level of brutality, efficiency, and strength that had never been seen before. It wasn't just a battle they had lost. It was the beginning of the end of their dominance. The ex-Thorian fleet might regroup, but the damage had been done. They could no longer rely on their once imposing reputation to strike fear into the hearts of their enemies. Humanity had proven that they could strike back, harder, faster, and more ruthlessly than anyone could have imagined. As the ex-Thorian fleet limped away from the battle, Captain Hayes watched their retreating ships on her screen, a grim smile playing at the edges of her lips. She knew the war was far from over, but she also knew that the ex-Thorian Empire would never look at humanity the same way again. The galaxy would now know the true cost of underestimating the Deathworlders. The human fleet turned its attention to the next phase of their campaign. The ex-Thorian fleet had been broken, but there were still many enemies out there, many who had yet to face the full wrath of humanity. "We'll strike again," Captain Hayes said, her voice filled with a quiet determination. "We'll make sure the galaxy knows that humanity is not to be trifled with." As the human fleet set its course toward their next objective, the stars seemed to shimmer with an eerie sense of foreboding. The galaxy was about to learn the true power of humanity, something it had never experienced before, and the ex-Thorian Empire, along with anyone else who dared to challenge humanity, would soon find out just how unstoppable the Deathworlders truly were. This was only the beginning. The universe had shifted, and the human fleet was about to make its mark on the galaxy in ways no one could have predicted. The ex-Thorian Empire, crippled and humiliated, had retreated into the shadows, but that was only the first chapter of this story. Humanity had just proven its might, and now it was time to press the advantage. On board the flagship, Captain Hayes paced across the bridge, her eyes scanning the holographic maps that displayed the vast expanse of space. The ex-Thorian fleet was in disarray, but the question remained, who would they face next? Who else had been watching the destruction of the once feared ex-Thorian fleet and would now seek to challenge humanity? "Captain, we've received reports of multiple alien factions mobilizing," General Lyle said, his voice tight with concern. "It seems our message has been received, and they're not happy about it." Captain Hayes' eyes hardened. "Let them come. We've shown them what we're capable of, and I won't let anyone forget it." The situation was dire, but it was also the perfect opportunity for humanity to show its strength to the rest of the galaxy. Every species that had once believed that Earth was nothing but a primitive backwater world now knew the truth. Humanity had the power to crush them all. But the real question was, would they? The next battle was not just about survival, it was about making a statement. This was humanity's chance to prove once and for all that they would not be anyone's prey, that they would not be weak, and that their wrath was not something to be taken lightly. As the human fleet entered the unknown territories, where these new threats were rumored to reside, a sense of tension filled the air. The crew members aboard the ships knew what was at stake. The galaxy had just witnessed a new power rise, but would they be ready for what came next? Captain Hayes ordered the fleet to hold position just beyond the reach of a star system that was known to harbor a group of ruthless space marauders. Intelligence reports indicated that this faction had been waiting for an opportunity to strike, an opportunity that would never come again. "This is it," Captain Hayes said, standing tall before her crew. "We've shown them the power of humanity once. Now we show them we are unbreakable." General Lyle nodded, his hand hovering over the controls. "They will think twice before challenging us again." The enemy fleet was soon detected, a massive armada of sleek ships that appeared from the darkness of space. The new faction was everything the ex-Thorian Empire had once been: strong, confident, and ruthless. But what they didn't realize was that they were about to face something they had never encountered before, a force that could not be intimidated, a force that would not back down. Captain Hayes stood motionless as the enemy fleet appeared on her screen, their ships moving with deadly precision. They were preparing to launch an attack. But humanity was ready. The moment they opened fire, the human fleet retaliated with brutal force, firing their weapons with devastating accuracy. The battle was intense. Explosions ripped through the silence of space, and the vast ships collided in violent clashes of energy and metal. But this time, the humans were not the underdogs. This time, they were the ones in control. The Marauder fleet had underestimated the strength of the human warriors. They thought they could push humanity around, but they were wrong. The Deathworlders had risen to become something far beyond what anyone had imagined. They fought like animals defending their territory, their attacks filled with a fierce and relentless determination. As the battle raged on, the enemy fleet was torn apart, ship after ship destroyed by the unforgiving might of humanity. The Marauders, once confident in their strength, now realized the terrible truth. They were not prepared for what the humans were capable of. Captain Hayes watched the enemy ships break apart before her eyes, her expression cold and determined. "This is the price of underestimating humanity," she muttered. General Lyle looked at the screen with a mixture of awe and respect. "They will never forget this, Captain. No one will." The battle ended in the total destruction of the Marauder fleet. As the last of their ships were consumed by the human assault, the silence of space once again returned. But the message was clear. Humanity was no longer a species to be ignored or underestimated. As the human fleet prepared to continue its journey into the unknown, the crew knew that this victory, like the one before it, would echo throughout the galaxy. Every empire, every faction, every race that had ever doubted humanity would now understand one simple truth. The Deathworlders were here to stay, and nothing would stand in their way. Captain Hayes turned toward her crew, a small, determined smile appearing on her face. "We've shown them our power. Let's show them our resolve." And so, the human fleet continued its journey through the stars, ready for whatever the galaxy had to throw at them. But one thing was certain: they had already proven that humanity's wrath could not be matched. And now, every alien species in the galaxy would have to decide whether to fear humanity or face its fury.